There's no doubt the humanities are in the grip of a kind of groupthink that has reached a tipping point where wrongthink has become evilthink. Any dissent from the dominant orthodoxies of our day is treated as morally suspect.
It proves that the 18% rely on the cowardice of the majority.
There's a majority there, there's silent.
We saw that actually there is a silent majority on this basic question of what are universities for. Is it for truth-seeking? Is it for pursuing the truth, preserving the truth, or is it for coddling?
So you're a professor at Cambridge, correct?
Correct.
Right. So whether it's your department or any other, at least in the humanities, if they heard this discussion, what would the average professor say?
They'd be startled, possibly horrified that I was taking part in it at all.
No, they're not judging you by the company you keep.
No, well, that's exactly how they would be judging him. That's really important.
So, absolutely right. So there is, I think in universities like Cambridge, Oxford, UK universities, I think the intellectual climate is probably healthier than it is elsewhere. But there's no doubt that the humanities are in the grip of a kind of groupthink that has reached a tipping point where wrongthink has become evilthink. Any dissent from the dominant orthodoxies of our day is treated as morally suspect, as problematic. And what that means is the issues get that sort of roiling the public square get more and more urgent, it's impossible for the universities to fulfill one of their primary functions, which is to educate and inform and shepherd the public on increasingly difficult and technical ethical questions. And this is a huge problem. We've had some success in the UK context, but there's a limit to what government can do here and still maintain the sort of institutional freedoms that we've always valued, that have always been central to the founding vision.
Will it be known, to be very personal, and you don't have to answer, obviously, but will it be known to your colleagues that you were part of the ARC conference?
I suspect so. I don't have extensive interactions with colleagues.
Okay, that answers that.
Not as but they almost certainly will know that I'm involved. I don't know quite what they will make of it. They see me as a conservative. I've actually myself not experienced anything other than civility and curiosity. I work in the Faculty of Divinity, it's a religion department, and I think I wonder whether the intellectual culture in a place like that is a little bit saner than elsewhere. I think when you're anchored and rooted non-negotiably in a certain set of normative traditions, it is harder to just rush for the barricades. It's harder to create a kind of intellectual ground zero.
So I return to my original question to you. They heard our discussion. So, for example, your colleagues in your department hear that we are saying that the issue with in the vast majority of cases of violent crime is no father. Oh, they would say what?
I think a lot of them would. I think a good chunk of them would probably agree privately that we're onto something, that it's a debatable issue. I think the challenge is perhaps not so much the groupthink, but what one sociologist has called the spiral of silence.
Yeah.
That is to say, where you've got a dedicated vocal minority that's got its teeth into a contentious issue and is imposing a significant social cost to dissent. That creates a sort of a coward opposition, a silent opposition. That silence in turn is interpreted as a sort of tacit assent, and the spiral accelerates. So that you get a situation where, in fact, there's a 5-10% aggressive minority effectively wielding disproportionate influence over an intellectual culture. There are occasional moments when, as it were, the veil is lifted. This happened in Cambridge in late 2020. Cambridge has an odd medieval structure. Part of that structure includes a professors' parliament. It's called the Congregation in Oxford, and Regent House in Cambridge. And the Vice-Chancellor, early in 2020, proposed a change to University of Cambridge's freedom of speech policies, which was well intentioned. I think the language of respect sort of was threaded throughout it, and it was very clear that what was happening was that the effect of this statement would have been to give a heckler's veto to the most easily offended person in the university. It would, I think, have completely paralysed overnight the intellectual culture of Cambridge. Some of us got together. It took about 10 weeks to secure the 25 names we needed to initiate a debate in this professors' parliament. It took us a long time because those 25 names needed to be publicly signed. So we need 25 people to step out of the closet. It took us a long time. My colleague, Arif Ahmed, a libertarian atheist, we're normally fighting each other on the God question, but on this, we were shoulder to shoulder in the trenches. We got those 25 names, and this forced a vote of 11,000 staff at the university. I think there was a sort of turnout of about 15-20%, very high for this sort of thing. And crucially, it was a secret ballot. And so nobody knew how everyone else was going to vote. Now, this shattered the spiral of silence. And when the votes came through, I could hardly believe it, but 87% of those who voted said, we don't want respect, we want tolerance. It's obvious that there are views that we disrespect, that we loathe, but that we must accept that we've got to tolerate these views if we're going to have a functioning intellectual culture. That was a moment, as I said, where sort of the flare went up, the veil was sort of torn apart. We saw that actually there is a silent majority on this basic question of what a university is for. Is it for truth-seeking? Is it for pursuing the truth, preserving the truth, promulgating the truth? Or is it for coddling? And overwhelmingly, my colleagues voted for the former.
It proves that the 18% rely on the cowardice of the majority.
Mm-hmm.
That's
So the double lesson is that there's a majority there, they're silent. The other thing is you and your friend took a stand.
right.
Where should we take things? I mean, there's clearly a crisis of our institutions, our institutional life. Various options and solutions have been put on the table. I was telling somebody the other day that it sometimes feels like we're in the 1520s, just after the Reformation. An enormous technological change. Back then, the printing press. Now, the digital revolution is opening up all sorts of crises, but also all sorts of opportunities. Institutionally, you might say, the early Lutheran option. We can fix this. We just need to find good people within the institutions to change from within. Universitas semper reformanda. They're the Calvinists who say, right, we're going off to build a Geneva. We need parallel institutions. These institutions are too rotten. We've got to start afresh. And I know that some are doing this. Stephen Blackwood, who was speaking yesterday, is doing that at Ralston College. Neil Ferguson, who was here as well, is doing that with others at the University of Austin in Texas. I know there's the Ramsey Center for Western Civilization over in Australia.
Boycotted by most of our universities.
There we go. And it took
Boycotted by who?
Most of our universities.
They're very difficult to get.
I didn't want people studying this.
And I think it'd be useful to get back to that as a case study, I think. And then I think there's a sort of third option, which is sort of called a sort of digital Anabaptist option, which is where, to hell with institutions. Let's just work with networks. Let's just focus on building up creative minorities through these new tools that have opened up, a sort of emerging ecosystem of podcasting and YouTubers and Substack and Twitter and so on. I'm not sure these are all mutually exclusive, and they are happening, and they are, I think, changing the terms of public debate and enabling us, those creative minorities who are horrified at the developments and want to preserve what's best about Western civilization, to do our bit. Do any of you take a particular stand on those three options? Do you think we should start new institutions? Is there any way of a sort of insulating or protecting these institutions from the get-go, or is there the sort of the progressive drift simply inevitable? We could set up a fancy new university, but the fact is, in 25 30 years' time, the founder's intents will simply be ignored and will have done it for nothing.
Now we need a restoration of the understanding of subsidiarity.
Say more, John. Say more. The subsidiarity doctrine, this idea that power...
Do what you can at your own level, accept responsibility for yourself and those around you. It's the thinking behind Ozplace's that. I think, government of the people, by the people, for the people. It was Wycliffe saying, govern yourself. Jordan Peterson says, go back to your bedroom, sort yourself out.
Well, I love the biblical view again, the Torah's view. Each person living under their own vine and fig tree. And that was George Washington's favorite quote from the Bible, 49 times in his letters. That, in other words, local peace and freedom.
Yes.
Under your own vine and fig tree. Obviously, that's a messianic hope in the prophets, but it also at the time of King Solomon, it said after the great coronations, they all went back to live peacefully under their own vine and fig tree, local. But to answer your question, I favor individuals and their work personally, but we can't dismiss institutions. You think of Talleyrand's famous remark, without individuals, nothing ever happens. Without institutions, nothing ever lasts. So I think we've got to reform them and be engaged. So personally, I disagree with, say, the Benedict option or the Anabaptists. We drop out and have nice little Christian or whatever communities. No. I think we've got to be engaged in the media, in science, in law, in politics, as salt and light. And those who are followers of Jesus, he called them to be salt and light. In other words, symbols of engagement and penetration. So I'd be very much in favor of that.
Well, to just put in a little defense of Rod Clare's Benedict option, I mean, I think and that's been a common criticism, and I think Rod's aim in that book was to say that, look, we can't make a difference to the public square, we can't make a difference to the institution.
Of course we can.
Sclerosis, if we haven't got a process of catechesis and formation, family formation, moral formation, intellectual, spiritual formation.
But the monastic movement was, I think, reversed by the Reformation. And the Reformation is sometimes called a remonking of faith. In other words, everyone had their sense of calling from God. They engaged wherever they were, everyone, everywhere, in everything. And that was far more powerful than having monastic communities. That's where Rod and I differ. Friendly way.
No, I was a politician once, so I've got to have a two-way bet on this. And by that I mean, first observation I'd make is I'm not sure we're going to get much choice. I think reality may very well mug us. We're in grave geopolitical danger in the Western world today, and we've brought it on ourselves in many ways. But the second point I'd make is I'm not sure there's anywhere to flee anymore, like the Anabaptists or the Puritans, really. They'll find us out.
Space, John. I mean, you can see some of the far-out people. They really are talking of new civilizations, extraterrestrial.
But to land us, in my own personal view, if I take Australia anyway, I actually think our institutions, in inverted commas, as structures, are still livable. It's just we've got the wrong people with the wrong attitudes and so forth in them. The one set of institutions I do wonder about, frankly, is our universities. Maybe they really have reached the end. Maybe they have. But if you stop and think about our instruments of governments, I think about our court structures, I think even in our school structures in Australia, the structures themselves are still fit for habitation. They just need a darn good clean-up and a complete change of attitudes and be populated by, if you like, a different set of elites. We've got to have leadership. You've got to have bureaucracy. You've got to have school teachers. You've got to have courts with judges in them, and you're going to have some sort of people that, I guess, run some form of universities. But the staggering thing in Australia is we've recently seen with the debate about whether to entrench a group right in our constitution. I mean, what has happened to people? They can't see that the answer to disadvantage people in a community is not to turn your constitution from something which it ought to be, blind to your wealth, gender, place of living, power, colour, ancestry. That's the model. That's the template. That's the basis of freedom and flourishing in a legal sense. And
And what happened in Australia is tradie belt got it completely. The immigrant population got it completely. The university-educated people who were not face-to-face with this problem didn't get it at all. And so you've got this great problem that a combination of sound teaching and contact with the real world means that more and more we live in a society where knowledge is not necessarily acquainted with wisdom.
Not necessarily. Drop necessarily.
I'm trying to be kind.
Yeah.
You see, got knowledge and wisdom.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's interesting. I don't know how related they are, and I'll tell you why. I wrote a piece, I write a weekly column, and I wrote a column a few months ago that I believe that when I was 12, and I'm just arbitrarily picking a young age, that most of my classmates in my yeshiva, religious Jewish school, half-day Hebrew, half-day English, very rigorous education, I believe that most of my classmates had more wisdom than the faculty at Harvard. Today's faculty at Harvard. We didn't have much knowledge in 12. All we were taught basically was wisdom. And because I remember all the aphorisms that I learned. Who was the strong man, the one who conquers his own urge? And I thought, wow, that's pretty powerful. I have to conquer Dennis Prager's nature. That was one of the great lessons of my life. They were just on oak tags, they used to call it, across the room, aphorisms from Hebrew scriptures or from the Talmud, and they shaped my life. And the idea that you have to fight yourself is the antithesis of the left-wing idea you have to fight society. I learned that I am my greatest problem. In secular school, you learn America is your greatest problem. There's a very big difference. That's a wisdom issue. So I didn't have much knowledge, but I really did have wisdom at 12. Not because I'm Dennis, but because I was taught wisdom. Yeah. As regards, if I may just add, the institutional issue, I have in this regard, it's painful to say, I can't think of an institution in the United States that I now trust. In the medical institution, academic institution, government institution, one simple example. Since the Department of Education was created, education has deteriorated in every measurable way in the United States of America. A great institution. How's this? Stanford University has more administrators than students. Really? Yes.
By a factor of 3 or 4, I think.
Oh, no, I think it's bad enough that it's just absolutely the case. But it is in absolute numbers, which is astonishing. Yeah. And what are they doing? They're hurting Stanford and children.
Taking them a big paycheck.
Yeah, that's right. I said institutions attract those who love power and those who love money. That's the general trend.
I think, I think I'd hasten to add that I understand entirely what you're saying about those institutions when you say you feel you can't trust them anymore. My point would be it's not necessarily the structure or the legislation or the whatever that set up that institution. I'm saying that part. In my country, I think largely most of them are still fit for purpose. But I take entirely, they're only trustworthy of the people in them, manning them, peopling them. And that's surely where the problem is.
And the ideology that the people are following.
Yeah, yeah. There's one thing I wouldn't mind, James, you may be the one to sort of answer my concerns on this one. You might have noticed that Oz and Dennis and I have a little more grey hair than you. I mean, it doesn't matter if we get cancelled. We're all sort of independent and out there and, I mean, very different for somebody still in the workplace or hoping to be in the workplace in these environments. Much harder for them to stand up. It could cost them far more than it's going to cost us.
That's right.
How do we support those people?
Well,
I mean, actually, to tell you the truth, it makes me really angry as a father and a grandfather that should be the case. If I had $1 for every time I've heard a young person say, I don't actually agree with what my tutor here is asking for, but if I don't give him what he wants, I won't get passed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what do those tutors think they're doing? How do they sleep on themselves at night?
No, the disconnect is real, and we're effectively rearing a generation who are used to getting into the habit of giving the answers that they know ought to be given. And these are the ones who make it through. These are the guys. These are the ones who've got the antennae to realise that they're being fed falsehoods, or at least contentious claims. So it's very hard to solve this problem. We have within the university certainly academic freedom. Ostensibly, it's a precious professional privilege, but it's not exercised much. And the reason it's not exercised much is that most people believe the same things, very contentious things about fundamental questions. So, I mean, one of the developments we've seen in the last 3 or 4 years in the UK has been a sort of emergence of a sort of, various grassroots sort of pop-up activist organisations. We've got the Free Speech Union here, which started about 4 years ago. We've got lots of little organisations that have been quietly sort of turning the tide on the trans debate. Some very courageous gender-critical feminists who are taking a stand. And there are some wonderful moral exemplars emerging, people who either have been cancelled or taking great risks that are likely to lead to them being cancelled. And I think people see that courage and follow it. And we've got, as it were, I think, a larger and larger network of dissidents. And only last weekend here in London, I was at the Battle of Ideas, which has been running for a few years now, about 1,000 people coming together, debating freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, difficult issues, lots of crosswords, but it wasn't a dialogue of the deaf. We really were engaging in healthy debate. As I left the Battle of Ideas in Westminster, I walked across Parliament Square into a crowd of 100,000 people flying Palestinian flags and screaming intifada from Palestine to the sea, etc., etc. I mean, it was. I got the impression that I just stepped into a completely different culture, and so what's happening really is we're seeing the emergence of battle lines, I suppose, and two completely different ways of understanding what a society is for, and what true freedom consists in, and indeed the value of freedom itself.